I'll just scroll through these while people are arriving, because some people have not seen them before. This is our featured charity for the week, called Testimony Tailors, and we really like the ethos. It's a small charity where the money goes to buy sewing machines and things like that to this small sewing cooperative of Rohingya refugees. The money pays a refugee to make a dress for another refugee, and it gives them sewing skills and the ability to sew over things and make a bit of a living for themselves. And so if anybody feels inclined to make even a tiny donation to them, our total at the moment is 50% of our £500 target.
Hi, Julie.
Hello. Hello. I can't see you.
Oh, right, yeah. Scroll down and you'll be able to.
Scroll down. God knows how I do that, but I will do it. I've not had a look like this before.
So shall we pass over to Penny, and you can do the introductions?
I can. Hello, hello, hello. Wow. So I'm absolutely amazed and pleased to see so many people here for what's going to be a joint Cafe Transition and Emails Fashion Week set of talks. And so thanks ever so much for coming. Just to let you know that Cafe Transition is going to be on every month or two, so keep an eye out for other talks that are generally about environmental and sustainability issues. So if you want to know any more, you can go to the Cafe Transition Facebook page. But I will now pass back to Jane, and she'll tell you a bit more about the events this evening and the charity that we've been supporting this week.
Thank you. Right. So the pictures here, which some of you have not seen before, kind of represent the whole theme of the week. It's about clothes that we buy from charity shops. It's how clothes make us feel. It's about clothes through history. Tonight, we're looking at these two pictures. One is about the environmental cost of clothes, and this one is about the human cost, the labour effects of cheap clothing. So that's why that montage has been our image for the week. So Liz Longdon first will be talking about the environmental effects of our fashion addiction. And Jill Scott from Hayfield will be doing the second part of the talk on the labour that it takes and the effects on those people of creating our fashions. Just a reminder that we are fundraising for this nice charity, Testimony Tailors, and one of my glamorous assistants, I think, will put the links for you into the chat box, hopefully now or maybe later in the meeting. I won't spend much time on those now because I think we have got a lot to listen to from our two speakers. It's a very nice charity. We're very pleased to be supporting them.
Can you all see me? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, marvellous. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for coming. I hope I'm not going to plunge you all into a fit of gloom after the lovely week we've had so far. Anyway, my name's Liz Longdon. I'm a New Mills resident. I've been for many years, and a member of New Mills Transition for about 4 years now. I first got involved when something made me realise what a huge problem plastic was becoming for the planet. And I started talking about it online, mostly in Facebook posts. And Phil from Transition contacted me and said, do I want some help with that? And that's how I got entangled, if you will forgive the pun. In Transition, I met Jane and we started Rethink Plastic High Peak. And after the community conversation, that has now become Rethink Waste High Peak. And we started looking at all sorts of issues to do with recycling and plastic pollution. Now, I hadn't even realised that synthetic fibres were a form of plastic until someone sent me a post about how they shed microfibres into our waterways every time they are washed. And that led us to start looking to all sorts of issues with the manufacture, transportation, retailing, laundering and disposal of clothing. And I first heard that phrase, fast fashion. New slide, please. Okay, fast fashion appears to have been a trend that really started accelerating about 30 years ago. And what appears to have happened is that stores like British Home Stores and Marks and Spencer's started producing more fashionable and affordable clothing. And the pure fashion retailers pushed back by creating more frequent collections to maintain interest in their brands. And that trend just kept on developing, and we're now at a stage where some fashion producers are putting out up to 18 collections in a year. They've saved costs by using a bigger proportion of more cheaply made synthetic fibres and by resisting any improvements in pay and conditions for garment workers, largely but not wholly in the third world. And more of this later from Jill. The huge rise in social media has been used by retailers to drive this trend further, with things like influencers posting photographs of themselves in a continuous stream of new outfits and introducing the idea that it is somehow embarrassing to be seen in the same outfit twice. All this has driven consumption, and we now buy an average of 4 new garments a month, and averaged over a year 4 times as many as 30 years ago. This is capitalism in action. All in all, the fashion and textile industry is now thought to be the second biggest polluter in the world after the oil industry. Bearing in mind, of course, that most synthetic fibres are a product of the oil industry. New slide, Jane, please. Okay, before I start talking about actual scientific figures, I just want to point out that I'm not a scientist. I couldn't analyse a proper scientific paper to save my life. And acknowledging that everything you see on the internet is not God's honest truth. So what I've tried to do is not use any fact that I've not been able to corroborate by finding it on a different website. And I've saved all the websites that I have used in case anybody wants to look at them. But I think it's fairly obvious that even if an exact, the gist of the thing is true. Okay, so looking at the carbon cost of our fashion industry. So reports have put the carbon cost of the current textile and garment industry, if taken right across the life history of a garment, at 3.3 billion tonnes annually. And this is apparently more than all the world's flights and maritime shipping, and close to the total annual carbon spend of the whole EU. And this is projected to increase to 25% of the world's carbon spend if the trends continue as they are. Now, if you look at the graph, you can see that the vast majority of the carbon cost of an item is in its manufacture. And contributions such as laundering have a really, really small impact. In the UK, there is SCAP, which is the Sustainable Clothing Action Plan, which was put in place in 2010 as part of the Conservative and Liberal coalition plans. And they set goals for the next 10 years, which brings us to now. There are about 20 or 30 signatories across the garment retail field, including charity shop sellers. And they undertook to improve their performance in carbon spend, the waste they produced and the water pollution they reduced. I did find a report from last year which showed that most of the targets have been at least part met, but only those signatories. And also the targets were set against tonnes of produce. So you could still have as much growth in production as you wanted without actually affecting your SCAP targets. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And then 2 years ago, the United Nations convened the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, which again set targets in reducing greenhouse gases, and the targets were set for 2030. However, even if those targets were met completely, that does not keep us to the 1.5 centigrade rise in temperature set by the IPCC a few years ago. In the UK, we spent 351 million tonnes of carbon last year, and that's from a government website, and 26.2 carbon spend annually on clothing. That's about a seventh, isn't it? I was going to try and give you accurate figures for what is a single piece of clothing cost in carbon, but I found too much variation, or statements such as a new white shirt has the same carbon cost as driving a car for 35 miles. And I don't know about you, but I don't find that sort of thing particularly helpful. But one fact is quite clear to me. Given that 70% of the carbon cost is in production and a load more is in transportation, the easiest and cheapest way to reduce the carbon cost of clothing is to wear it many more times. The average garment is apparently only worn 7 times before being discarded. So in protest at this, I am currently wearing the same blue sweatshirt I've been wearing for the past 3 days, which is, I think, 8 years old, and underneath a 7-year-old t-shirt. I could find something older if I'd gone upstairs. Another slide, Jane, please.
Hang on.
Hang on.
Has it worked twice?
Okay, this is resources now. First of all, water. So water is used in huge amounts across fabric production. Cotton particularly is a very thirsty crop and uses more water than any other agricultural product at the minute. And 2.5% of the water use of everything globally. A simple t-shirt needs 2,700 litres of water from planting the crop to the finished item. Water is also used in the production of fabrics, in treating, dyeing, printing and washing, and these processes have the potential to leave water heavily polluted, and more of that later. And in land use, about 2.5% of arable land is used to grow plants for textiles, and the overwhelming proportion of this is cotton. Companies like Monsanto now own the vast majority of cotton seed, and this has taken control away from farmers, particularly in the third world. A lot of farmers now are given no option but to grow from the GM seed Monsanto has produced, and Monsanto has even done things like they have a patent now on a cotton seed that produces plants with seeds that are sterile, so they cannot be grown on from, and that obliges farmers to buy more seed. Cotton agriculture can leave land severely degraded because of the huge amounts of pesticides and fertilizers it needs. Oh, we've gone on one. Go back one. Jane, can you go back a slide? Okay, so I don't know if anybody knows where those photos are of. The picture on the left is from space. It's a photograph of the Aral Sea, which is a huge lake, or was a huge lake, on the border between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. In the last decades of the life of the Soviet Union, cotton was grown extensively in the region, and to irrigate it, enormous amounts of water were diverted from the rivers that feed the lake. The lake used to support thousands of people, particularly from fishing and agriculture, but now it is just about a desert, and you can see that the picture on the right is all that's left of the water. The soils are laden with pesticides and are so dry that they blow into the atmosphere in thousands of tonnes a year, and people living there apparently have incidence of throat cancer many times higher than the global average. In fact, efforts are now being made to restore part of the habit, but I think it's thought that it's never going to be possible to restore the whole lake. sorry, the next slide is just a piece of land that was meant to grow cotton, but the rain didn't come and the crop didn't grow. So organic cotton, if grown, has fewer problems with pollution, but it still needs crop rotation to keep soil healthy. So it needs farmers to have control of the land. Okay, new slides. So this is about waste. So last year in the UK, we bought 1.72 million tonnes of clothing, and we threw 1.5 million tonnes. According to one site I saw from Durham County Council, 30% of the clothing going into landfill is actually unworn. Now I don't know why they decided that, whether they could see tags on it or whether it was still in bags, I don't know. It didn't say, but 30%. And stories abound about people throwing away an article of clothing because it's lost a bit, because a bit of the hem's come down, or even because it's dirty, or because it's been worn. And another website that gave me the figure that most clothing is worn on average 7 times before being discarded. There have been other big stories about waste in the media over the past couple of years. So unsold items at the end of the season are trashed or burned rather than being sold cheaply. There was a big story about Burberry, wasn't there, a couple of years ago? And high-end fashion is just as guilty as the low end. And apparently there is a trend to buy online and for a lot of producers, it's easier and cheaper just to throw those returned items away. It's easier for them than checking them and packaging them. So waste for me is a huge problem, and for me it's linked to cheap prices, poor quality textiles, and I think we've effectively invented disposable clothing. A new slide, please. Okay, is Helen here? Helen Dean? If Helen's here, I'm sorry about this. I've been thinking about you and this slide, because this photograph is, well, the story is that this photograph's been on Facebook recently, and the story is that the lady that owned this pair of stretchy jeans put them into her composting bin for a year, and this is what's left when she took them out again. The cotton is all gone, and all that is plastic fibre. So recycling mixed fibres is really, really hard. And probably less than 30% of our discarded textiles are recycled. Textiles and fabric are also a little like plastic, in as much as the product of recycling is not often as good a quality as the original. So it is typically made into things like fillings for quilts, insulation, quilts and rugs, etc. Next slide, please. Oh, particularly from synthetic fabrics and microfibers. And I think Jane and me, this is what we know most about. Microfiber loss from clothes laundering and everyday wear and tear is now an established fact, and microfiber contamination in our environment is now being found everywhere. It doesn't just come from clothing, but also from the breakup of plastic that has escaped into the environment. So, for instance, from dust from brake linings and tyres, polystyrene blowing around landfill sites, cigarette filters, microbeads in cosmetics, and things like silly string. We now know that we are eating, drinking, and breathing microplastic. It's been found in fish, in seafood, in soil, in air, and joyfully in lung tissue. One thing particularly stuck in my mind, and this is from a scientist, we are finding plastic everywhere we look for it, from the deepest ocean to the highest mountain. So obviously they've got researchers out looking for microplastic, and everywhere they go, they find it everywhere. So how can we stop it? Okay, well, in terms of clothing, it is possible to put filters into sewage systems, which can then stop plastic being discharged into waterways, but it doesn't separate it from sewage sludge. And apparently we are in the habit of putting many thousand tonnes of sewage sludge onto our fields each year to act as fertiliser. It's possible to put filters into washing machines, which will retrieve the fibres before they get into the drainage system, but they are expensive. The cheapest I found looking online was over £100, and there are very few scientific reviews into their efficiency. Also, you still have to clean them, and that microfiber waste still has to go somewhere. And in my head, I can just imagine someone installing a filter and then getting it out to clean it and washing it under the tap. Can you just see that? But even supposing you don't do that, the microfiber's got to go somewhere, and the only way I can think that it would be safe would be locked up in a glass jar or something. Otherwise, it can still escape into the environment. It's no use just tipping it into your bin. There are other lower tech ideas. I have a guppy bag. I've been using it about a year. This is it. It's just basically a plastic bag with a very, very, very fine mesh and a nice sturdy zip at the top. And basically you put your synthetic fibres in that and then into the washing machine, and it's fibres inside. However, doesn't matter how often I look in that bag when it comes out of the washing machine, I never find any microfibres. I suspect that if it does work, the fibres are getting stuck to the damp and they come out of the machine, and they only shed when they're dry. So either inside my house so I can breathe them in, or into the air outside. And supposing it did catch them, you've still got to dispose of them safely. In terms of minimising fibre loss from your clothing, a couple of things you can do. You can use a cool, short wash. You can fill your machine properly, use the optimum proportions in the instructions, and the reduced friction will reduce fibre loss. And I think we can wash our clothes a bit less often. And I know people go clean head to toe every day. I don't think we need to do that. You can hang your clothes on the line to air them. Fresh air and sunshine does a power of good. You can go back to what Granny did and wear an apron when you're cooking and a serviette tucked into your neck when you're eating. Okay, new slide. Okay, pollution from chemicals. Jane found me that photo. It is horrible. Textile production uses a lot of water and a lot of chemicals in the water. Dyes, fixatives, acid bases, bleaches, technical chemicals like fireproofing and wrinkle resistors. And it is thought that up to 20% of water pollution globally is due to the textile industry. Particularly in the third world, there is inadequate control of the discharge of waste chemicals and water into waterways. While I was searching the internet for this information, I didn't find many bits that gave the point of view of the people that were working or living in the areas that were affected. But this quote is from a man who lives in the textile area of Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. He lives by a river. When I was young, we used to fish in the river and catch fish. There were no factories then. Now the water is black and the fish have gone. My children and grandchildren cannot do what I did. And there is a photograph with it, and I tell you, the water is black, ink black. It's quite an upsetting photograph. There was a study done in a place called Haridwar in India. I only found one, but I guess there might be more, where the water and soil was contaminated with heavy metals, chromium, iron, manganese, copper and cadmium, all of which can be considered toxic to wildlife and humans alike. And it does appear that it's across the Indian subcontinent that most of this pollution occurs, but I'm sure that there are problems in Indonesia and China as well. So what can we do longer term? We need to use much less in the way of synthetic fibre. Oh, sorry, Jane, new slide. I think when the news about synthetic fibres shedding into water first came out, people said, "Oh, I'm just going to buy natural fibres from now on." But if we're all going to carry on having as many clothes as we do now, that is just not an option. There is not the land, and they all carry their own problems anyway. So cotton, as you've heard, has huge environmental problems, and wool and silk have environmental impacts too. There are some natural fabrics that appear to have environmental advantages. So for instance, linen, and that is the flax plant growing there, and that is linen fabric. So linen is made from flax. It requires much less water than cotton. It's biodegradable unless it's dyed. It sequesters carbon, apparently. The fibres are stronger than cotton, which means the fabric will be long lasting. And all the plant can be used. The seeds can be crushed to make oil and are actually quite a healthy thing to eat. And the flowers, sorry, I can't remember about the flowers. There is another one, which is hemp. And hemp apparently is even better in all those ways. It's easy to grow in a temperate climate, doesn't use a lot of water, doesn't need a lot of pesticide, but unfortunately it's also marijuana. So it is at the minute certainly not a viable crop to grow easily in the UK, and you need a license. Okay, so all this information is fairly gloomy and it's hard to know what you can do. So I think the first thing really is to make this problem as much of a talking point as plastic has been for the past 5 years ago. Sorry, 5 years or so. So just about everybody, at least in places with access to information like we have, knows about plastic and the problem it has become for the planet. So let's talk about textiles and clothing. Let's talk about being a thoughtful and minimal consumer of clothing. Let's all go public about being a slow fashionista. We all need to look about how many clothes we all buy and own. The average number of items of clothing that we all currently have in our wardrobes and drawers has increased at least 40% in the last few decades. And most of us have more than a few items of clothing that never get worn. So we need to buy carefully. We need to buy good quality from suppliers that, as far as we can tell, have good environmental and employment practices. And then we need to look after these clothes and make them last. Wear them till you both wear out, but look after them. So that's all I had to say. I could talk about this quite a bit longer, but I think I better shut up. Like I say, all the websites that I looked at and used, I have saved. I would like to thank Katrina for her help with pointing me towards information, particularly about pollution. And I'm quite happy if anybody's got any questions or comments.
Okay, for the questions, I think it would help us if you could put your question into the chat, and then we'll take questions in a comparatively organised way. Would anybody like to type a question in? Or a comment? Comments are good.
Or not.
And if you prefer to ask it personally, just say hello and I will put you in. 2 new messages.
I've got those, thank you.
We don't actually have any questions. It was just so shocking.
How
How
good
good
is
is viscose? There's a good question. Liz, have you come across viscose in your travels, or shall we put that out to some of our other experts? What do you think?
I understand that viscose is supposed to be made from wood pulp, from the cellulose in wood pulp, and therefore it is meant to be a natural fabric. However, it is treated with various things which make it less friendly. And I think there are various different sorts, and it depends on the manufacturer.
Does anybody in the audience want to suggest something about viscose? Because we do have a few keen sewers here. What about bamboo? The question there, Liz.
Hello, Jill. That's my camping friend. Hello. Bamboo it's the same as it's meant to be able to produce a nice, clean, long-lasting fabric, but again, it has to be heavily treated with chemicals to do that. And also, if everybody got very keen on using bamboo, because of the places it grows easily, you don't know you don't know how much land would then go to bamboo use.
Yeah, again, it's about bamboo, good to a point, but then beyond that, you're just wasting resources. And we've got a nice comment there from Kate at Weishart and Wild. Viscose is treated with chemicals and is often the end of the paper trade and deforestation. So it's not a clean thing, it's connected with other problems. A couple of questions. Liz, can you still hear me? Yeah, we lost you briefly. When you suggest recycling clothes, how?
Well, there are recycling bins for us at the Water Swallows, and the various ones around the place as well in supermarket car parks. Also, charity shops, I think, are still accepting them, and if they can't sell them, that they are sent off for rags. In terms of discarding your clothes to charity shops, I think we're now realising it's less of a solution than we thought, because the vast majority do not get sold and they end up being shipped to the third world.
And while we're on recycling, do you know if clothes not good enough to sell can be recycled?
Yeah, they just get made into fibres for things like carpets and quilt fillers, sleeping bag fillers, that sort of thing. Insulation, maybe.
There's a good question next from Sophie. Do we know any more ethical producers of either clothes or fabric? So if we're only going to buy select things and we want to choose the most ethical, why don't people just pop the names of their favourite ethical suppliers into the chat while Lizzie's coming up with an answer to that one?
Sorry, what was the question?
Any more ethical producers? Do you know of any more reliably ethical clothes producers?
No. I guess that's something I didn't particularly focus on while I was doing this.
People Tree, for example, does anybody know whether People Tree are as good as they profess to be? Any comments on that? Companies that produce to order, that way no clothes are wasted.
Yeah, there's certain companies that will only produce once you've ordered, so you might have to wait 2 to 3 weeks and wait longer for that item, but A, that proves that you really want it, and B, they're not making thousands and thousands of clothes that might not sell.
That's
They're only
nice.
making what's bought.
That's wonderful. And somebody else, Theodora, uses the internet to find UK-based manufacturing. Eleanor says Patagonia. Theodora says if you look for organic cotton, it's got a high standard of growing and producing. And then we've got Ethical Consumer Magazine for advice, and Oxfam have a great online clothing shop now for secondhand stuff. Okay, so we'll go back up to another question up here. On the other side of the coin, if we all follow the suggestions to buy less clothes, then surely ultimately it would affect employment and incomes of lower paid workers. So maybe that's a question that we could hang over and ask to Jill at the end of hers. So Jill, is that all right if you can ask that one later?
Yeah.
And from Anne Soper, even when you have worn clothes to death, they can be sold by charity shops for rags. Please don't throw them in the bin. Yes. Do we know where the recycled fibres go? I think, has that been answered by Liz with her carpets and low grade rags and things? Does anybody want to add anything more on that? Liz or anybody?
Now, I've got to say, of the websites that got presented to me when I typed questions in, there is so much information. It is a tiny bit overwhelming. You have to pick and choose. And I guess I picked and chose what to talk about the most, which is what I know about the most, I guess, which was the microfiber stuff. And
a nice comment from here from White and Wild, Kate and Martin, watch out for provenance. Remember that we need to think about where and how the product is produced. So that, I think, means just because it's got an impressive sounding label on it doesn't necessarily mean that it does what it says on the tin. Bridget saying, find your local dressmaker and become best friends. What a nice idea. And Sophie says, if we paid more per item, people could still be well paid. And Theodora's giving us a link there to Earthkind Originals, which sounds a good place. Do you want to say anything about those, Theodora? What do you know about them?
Yeah, all I really know is that they're based in Cornwall. They do organic cotton. They do their manufacturing in the UK. So basically, if you are in, like, it's not a perfect metric, but if you get something that's made in the UK, you can almost trust that they've followed UK labor laws. Obviously, with a big sort of, hoo-ha about the clothing manufacturers in Leicester around lockdown and that sort of thing. It's not a perfect, as I said, it's not a perfect metric, but I do think that it's a start anyway in making sure that your clothing's been produced at least fairly ethically.
We do what we can, don't we? Nice question from Liz. Do leftover clothes from charity shops being sent to other parts of the world sometimes undermine their local clothes producers? So you've got people being great making clothes and then a load of cheap returned things come from our country. Do we know anything about that?
I think I have read that somewhere.
But we don't have a lot of information on that. Okay, so I think that's a really interesting lot of questions, answered really quickly and to the best of our knowledge for now. And I think it's time now to ask Jill, are you ready to
I think so.
put your presentation on and share your screen?
Yeah. Okay. I hope when I click this, it moves on. Right. Thanks to Liz for that. I mean, like she said at the start, it does feel that tonight is quite, in many ways, depressing because we can see what's going on. But I also see it very much as a call to action. And I think that's what we've got to take out of tonight. So some of my slides might repeat a bit of what Liz said, so I'll skip through those. But my part of the presentation is to look at who makes our clothes and at what price. And really, what we need to do is to kind of mend the broken relationship between those people who make our clothes and the people who wear them. And of course, look at who is making the money out of them. So it's building bridges, making that relationship strong. We all know about the dark history of the textile industry and fashion, and Theodora talked about this on Monday. The wealth of Manchester, just up the road, it used to be called Cottonopolis, and we know that that was built out of the suffering of people who were enslaved. And so the cost to people in the fashion industry and textile industry goes back through centuries. And the next slide I'm going to show you sort of tells a little story of this. Why hasn't it moved on, I wonder? Yeah, here it is. Right. I'm going to split this up in a minute and you'll be able to see it in more detail. Now, this exquisite painting is by some contemporary artists called the Singh twins, and they paint in the style of traditional Indian miniatures, but they have a very, very sharp social commentary going on as well. And this is about a specific aspect of fashion. It's the history of indigo. Now, indigo, we believe, originated in India. It's a plant. It's a dye that's made from a plant. And here, this magnificent woman is Queen Mumtaz Mahal, who first put the monopoly on the sale of indigo and became very, very rich as a result of it. She's bedecked in jewels, and she's holding in her hand this enormous jewel because indigo was called blue gold because it was so valuable. But you'll see we've got a bit of a cultural challenge here because she's also wearing blue denim jeans. And we all think of denim jeans as Western fashion, possibly from America. But in fact, denim was first made in the Indian port town of Dongri. And it was used to make sails for ships and clothing for sailors, dungarees. So just a kind of reminder there. Now, I wonder if I should go on to splitting the screen, the picture. Yeah, here we go. Oh, sorry, it's covered up a bit. Here is Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese explorer, sort of 15th century, who was supposed to have discovered the trade route to India. Well, like hell he did. He was actually taken there by a navigator from Gujarat. So let's decolonize history a little bit here. Anyway, the significance of Vasco da Gama in terms of indigo was that he opened up the kind of trade route, and it became cheaper because it wasn't going across land through middlemen. And so it was coming to Europe and to the UK. But there was quite a lot of opposition to this because the homegrown blue dye, which was, of course, woad, they were very angry about this because they thought that people wouldn't want to buy woad anymore. So they kind of tried to ban the sale of indigo, and they called it the devil's blue. So here, this little guy here is part of a kind of campaign to demonize indigo. But of course, it didn't take on because indigo is this beautiful, rich blue dye that, you know, the rich and powerful and royalty wanted to use. Connections with war and conflict. Up here, we've got Napoleon and Nelson. So I'm looking at the left-hand top corner here. And the military uniforms of both the British and the French were dyed blue using indigo. And you can't see it ever so clearly, but there's a beautiful border. And this is representing the coat of arms of Haiti. And of course, there was the very successful slave rebellion in Haiti, led by Toussaint Louverture. And the indigo crop was destroyed. And down here, I've switched over to the right, is a very disturbing image of an enslaved man showing how indigo was, again, built on the backs of people being brutalized and exploited. Now, after the New World crops were destroyed, indigo was sent back to India, if you like, mainly to West Bengal. And under British rule, the British forced the Indian peasants to grow indigo and other cash crops at the expense of food. And of course, this led to famine. So here's a very disturbing image of a starving man because he has no food because he's been growing indigo. And just above his head here is a sprig of jasmine. And jasmine is the symbol of West Bengal, but it's also known as the tree of sorrow. So I think it kind of sums up a lot of what has happened in the textile and fashion industry and what is happening now. And the Singh twins bring us back into the present day by having an image here of a garment factory in Bangladesh. So that's the history of indigo, and it beautifully and exquisitely shows a sort of history of, like I said, an aspect of fashion. Right, okay, now when did I first sort of start becoming aware of fashion? Probably in the 70s when I was a teenager. And like a lot of people here, I made my clothes. This was the only way I could afford, if you like, to have several clothes. So I would go down and buy Simplicity Patterns and Butterick and maybe occasionally Vogue, and I would make my own clothes. I could go to Stockport Market, buy a metre of corduroy and whip up a mini skirt in a night kind of thing. My mum had this beautiful Singer sewing machine that I would use, and she ruined it. She didn't mean to ruin it, but she did, because what she did was she had a motor, an electric motor fitted onto a beautiful Singer sewing machine so she could sew faster. I can't really blame her for that, but it's a shame. Anyway, my 18th birthday present was an electric sewing machine. And then when we started having children so the late 80s, early 90s, I thought, I will make clothes for my children, just like my mum did. And a friend said to me, what are you doing? And I said, well, it's the most economical way to do things. They said, no, it's not. It's much cheaper to buy clothes than make them nowadays. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by this. But to my shame, I never really questioned it. I kind of went along with it and thought, yes, I've got 3 children, I'm working, I'll buy clothes. And it's only that we've started to kind of become much more aware of why clothes are so cheap. So fast fashion, Liz spoke a lot about fast fashion. Just a few images here. The first store really to mass produce clothes cheaply was then called Hennes. Hennes means hers in Swedish. And it was opened in 1946 by a guy called Erling Persson. And by the 60s, he'd opened about 42 shops across Europe. So his brand of kind of cheaper, affordable clothing was widely available to people, which is sounding like a good idea. But you then move to Zara, and the owner of Zara, a guy called Amancio Ortega, was the first person to really ramp it up to what we're more used to today, because he had this mission that he could have a design in a designer's head and the clothing on the rails in the shops within 15 days. So all of a sudden, everything is going to be massively speeded up. And it was kind of 1970s that the shops were appearing in Europe, and about 1990, they were in New York, and it was apparently the New York Times that coined the phrase fast fashion. And they also have the business model of separating the production for your capital intensive production, which is like your computer generated pattern cutting, which is quite well paid, etc., and designs, to the labor intensive work, which of course is making garments. And this is very much where the first world is kind of getting the best paid jobs, and the third world is getting the low paid jobs. And Primark, I think, for a lot of people, really opened their eyes and thought, how can things be so cheap? I think people really did start to question that you can't have a T-shirt for £2 without somebody paying the price somewhere. But Primark are made to look positively ethical alongside companies like Missguided and Boohoo, shamefully both in Manchester. Boohoo also trades under they've got a branch called Pretty Little Thing and Nasty Gal. I mean, the names kind of speak for themselves. And we will be talking more about that. So fast fashion is really speeding up. Then Liz spoke about this, fast rate of production. We used to have seasonal clothes, as Liz said, but if you have a look on Missguided's website, they had 639 items listed under new this week, 639. And Pretty Little Thing had 284 items listed under new today. So that just shows the rate of production. And of course, in terms of the garments, these are coming out without having been tested for durability, wearability, and so they fall apart. And this is called planned obsolescence. So people, there's a deliberate tactic going on that your garments will fall apart, so you have to replace them. But again, if you think about the people sewing these garments to keep up with that pace, it's quite horrendous. We've talked about online buying, these must-have garments. You can just click it, they're so cheap, you can buy several. Fast, cheap next-day delivery and free returns. This shouldn't be happening. And I don't know much about Klarna, but I've seen it in the news recently about sort of data protection stuff. But that's a kind of delivery service that is coming under scrutiny now. Perhaps people know more about that. And the fast wearing discarding of garments, people not wanting to be seen in an outfit more than once. And Liz has given you some statistics that, in fact, this is one I don't think she did give. Between 1995 and 2014, the cost of clothing in the UK has fallen by 50%, and that's quite massive. Now, some people might say, yes, but it's allowing people who haven't got a lot of money, it's empowering them because they can buy new clothes and they can look smart. But there's this quote from somebody called Bobby Santa Maria of an organisation called the Business and Human Rights Resource Centre. And she says, global brands are quick to use female empowerment when marketing their products, but when they exert relentless pressure to get more products for less money, it's women workers who pay the price. So let's focus on some of these women workers. And I'm going to focus on an event that I think, well, it did shock the world. People will remember this. The Rana Plaza disaster. 1,127 people died. Now, in this country, we have tragedies that are industrial, etc., but nothing on anything like this scale. I think the most recent disaster where a high number of people were killed was, I don't know if people remember, there was the Piper Alpha oil rig in the North Sea, and there was a massive fire and explosion in 1988, and 167 men were killed and 30 bodies have never been recovered. But just look at those figures. And again, there's this disconnect between the first world and what we see as a tragedy and what is going on there. I want to look a bit more at Rana Plaza. Okay, so it happened in 2013, 24th of April, and I'm sure lots of you remember it. In Dhaka, again, this is the place where Liz was talking about the Ink Black River. And it's the most deadly structural failure accident in modern history. The victims were women, almost exclusively women workers, along with some of their children who were actually in the nursery there. I have no idea what the conditions of the nursery were like. And there were about 2,500 people who got seriously injured, with some of them with life debilitating injuries, and they will never recover. And I know we always think about Primark related to this, but as Liz said, it's high-end fashion as well. They're made in the same factory. Now, Rana Plaza was owned by Suhail Rana, whose family had connections with the then Bangladeshi government. And the building was not a factory. It was built really for offices. It wasn't built to hold heavy machinery. It was divided up into lots of small factories, crammed in, holding this heavy machinery, no ventilation, dust everywhere. And on April the 23rd, the day before, there was a crack that appeared in one of the structural pillars, and an engineer was sent in to have a look. And he said that the building must be evacuated immediately. But Suhail Rana said, no, anybody who doesn't come to work the next day will have a month's pay withheld from them. The next day, as soon as the generator was turned on, the building collapsed. And we know the tragedy that happened. And the Bangladesh government came under a lot of criticism for putting national pride before human safety, and they refused the help of the UN in the rescue operation. In 2015, murder charges were brought against 42 different people, including the owners. They still haven't been charged. In 2017, it's a bit like Al Capone, really, this. In 2017, Rana was sentenced to a maximum 3 years imprisonment for failing to declare his wealth, not for murdering over 1,000 people. And the trials for murder have been delayed due to appeals at the Higher Court. So nobody really cares particularly. And the pictures here are of families who lost people. And that's the rubble there. But maybe it wasn't all bad in the sense that things did happen afterwards. Liz has hinted at different things that have come in to sort of protect garment workers, and in effect, most of them are for safety reasons. The Bangladesh Accord was an agreement between trade unions and the brands so that all their factories could be properly inspected for safety. And in fact, I found this quite an astonishing statistic, actually. It's kind of presented as if it's good news, that the number of deaths did drop from 71 a year to 17. So there's still 17 deaths a year. And in 2018, March 2019, at least 95 people died in fires in factories. So one of the greatest risks is fires in factories. The actual safety regulations are not put in place. Now, the Bangladesh Accord was renewed for a year, extended for a year in 2019. I don't know what's happened because 2020, we've now got COVID. But we have had strikes in Bangladesh. The women garment workers went on strike. This was again in 2018, protesting against their pay of $50 an hour. And 11,000 of them were sacked for going on strike. So obviously trade union rights have been completely ignored. So much for kind of improvements there for workers. And when you compare $50 an hour with the annual payment to directors of Gap in the same year, they got $20 million. So it's just absolutely outrageous. Standards are kind of dropping all the time, and fast fashion is making this worse. There's an American organization, Global Labor Justice, who, when the Me Too campaign started, they started the Garment Me Too campaign because the instances of gender-based violence have increased radically since the kind of demands for clothing have been increased as well. So a lot of women were getting beaten at work because they weren't meeting the targets, the completely unrealistic targets. We're all very aware of Labour Behind the Label, I think, because they're British, and whenever there's articles in paper like The Guardian, it's usually somebody from Labour Behind the Label who does it. The Ethical Trade Initiative is an interesting organisation because we were talking about ethical clothing. That's a kind of a mark where companies have to kind of pass certain standards to be able to get it. But the problem is, you can have your main factory inspected and it appears that you're doing okay, but there's an awful lot, and this is a real problem in the garment industry, there's an awful lot of subcontracting and people don't know what's happening there. Fashion Revolution are a wonderful organisation, and we'll talk a little bit more about them recently, because like Labour Behind the Label, they are kind of whistleblowing a lot, and they had a hashtag Who Makes Your Clothes campaign. So there's quite a few things coming out that we need to kind of latch onto. Beyond Retro, I think, are an online, second-hand shop. Trade unions are doing their best, but I actually think they should be doing more, particularly in this country, and we'll come on to that later. And governments, what are they doing? Again, we'll look at that. But this is an interesting little fact. Lowest paid workers at London Fashion Week paid £125 an hour. That's the lowest paid workers. Majority of garment workers in Vietnam paid £25 a month. It's staggering to think that we have got, like I said, this disconnect between what's happening in the first world and what's happening to these mainly women garment workers here. I don't want to die for fashion. Now, it took a huge human tragedy to bring to our attention what was going on in some of these factories in places like Bangladesh. And it's taken a global pandemic really for most people to realise what's going on here. Because companies like Boohoo practice what's called reshoring. So they bring the manufacture, the sort of sewing bit of their garment making back to Britain, mainly to Leicester. And they use exactly the same business model, whereas they're using these big kind of warehouses that are broken up into lots of small workshops. So again, it's the classic sort of divide and rule thing. So people can't unionize, they can't actually support each other. And again, what's happening is they are employing women who are usually migrant women and don't speak English. And it came to light before that, but it came to light during the coronavirus crisis because there was an outbreak of coronavirus in one of these factories. But it's quite interesting to kind of follow this story. So again, Labour Behind the Label investigated it, lockdown breaches, furlough fraud and conditions of modern slavery. So they're breaking the law. They're clearly breaking the law. And, finally, the business secretary has a look at it. And it's these complex and secretive supply chains where it looks like they might be being ethical in one place, but they're not. So we really have to kind of keep pressure on. And Boohoo are the really guilty ones. And Labour Behind the Label has got their claws into Boohoo, which is really good, and asking for improved labour rights. £3.50 an hour, these garment workers were getting paid. It's not even half of the living wage, but they were getting away with it. They were getting away with it because the authorities are not really checking. So this is the 3rd of July. On the 6th of July, I'm sure you saw this and you kind of think, yes, thank goodness for that. £1 billion were wiped off the value of Boohoo just over the weekend because people were so appalled at what is happening. So it really does go to show that if enough people sit up and take notice, then these companies will have to do something. And then they did have a review, an investigation, and it was found that the chain capitalised from lockdown opportunities. But have they gone to jail? I don't think so. They should. They should. So again, we're kind of looking at governments here. So that's what's happening recently, just literally a few weeks ago. And we've got to not take our eye off the ball. Right, so what can we do? Liz was talking about what can we do. There's a lot we can do. I feel that somehow there's more we can do for this than there might be for the environment. Maybe I'm wrong, As consumers, now we can boycott places, we certainly can, but a fashion revolution, who I talked about before, and I'm going to put an email, a website address up at the end, you must go onto their page and have a look, because under their little tab, Take Action, there is a template for an email that you can send to your favorite brand. Even if you're not buying clothes, send it to them, and it's urging them to take action to make sure they're producing clothes ethically. And the more emails that go through to these companies, the more effect there will be. And I think there's some sort of, I don't do Twitter, but I think there's some sort of way that you can contact Twitter as well. So if every single person that's on this Zoom tonight sends out at least one email, it will make an impact. So as creatives, I guess this event, you could classify that as something that's raising awareness, and we do need to kind of reach out to more people to kind of talk about it loud, as Liz said. Find creative ways of doing it, whether it's events, whether it's through artworks, kind of articles that we're writing. We've got to kind of do it, whether it's just the way we dress and we model it. Activists, I know there's quite a lot of activists on this group. Activism is in my blood. So, fair play to Extinction Rebellion. Look here, this is London Fashion Week taking over Oxford Street. This is, not everyone wants to do direct action, but it makes an impact. And whatever you think about it, I think any news is good news when you're looking at this. Dirty fashion, this was I won't go into this because this is about using man-made fibres in fashion that just don't go away. And Liz has covered that a lot. Please look at this report, Fixing Fashion. It's a cross-party report, and the members is MPs, and I'm trying to think, I try to look at the MPs, and I think the MP who's closest possibly to us, and maybe we can get her to come along and talk to us, is the new MP in Nottingham, Nadia Whitcomb, who some of you have probably have heard about, she's a member of this. Caroline Lucas is a member of this. So if you go on that, there's an email address. You can email these MPs and say, you know, what exactly is happening. And I do feel the environment is harder to tackle, because if you look at the report, Liz mentioned SCAP, Sustainable Clothing Action Plan. Now that is voluntary, and one of the recommendations was to make that mandatory. Rejected. The government rejected that. You know, perfectly reasonable suggestion. They rejected it. So we can write to them and say, please make it mandatory. Ban incinerating or landfilling unsold stock that can be reused or recycled. Rejected. A charge of 1 penny per garment on producers in order to raise investment for better clothing conditions and sorting in the UK. Rejected. So it makes depressing reading, but we have the power to contact these people and say, please do more about this. And as a community, I think this is something for us to discuss. And we are a global community. I think we need to think about that. In Newmilns, we have the One World Festival. We need to think one world. And I know there's people here from, you know, my niece from Chicago, there's people from London, from different places. But as communities, we need to think, what can we do to work on this? So this is really a call for action. And I hope nobody goes away without doing something. But I want to finish with a couple of slides that I hope will put a bit of a smile on your face. And the next one, I want family members to stay quiet on this, but I think Jane has asked you to unmute your microphone. I want you to look at this picture, or 2 pictures really, side by side, and tell me what you can see. So if anybody wants to just kind of, I don't know who's chairing this because I can't see everyone. If anyone wants to just shout something out, but please family members don't, and then I'll give you a bit of context. What can you see? What do you notice? Anyone like to say anything?
Same garment.
Wearing the same dress.
It's the same dress.
Same dress.
Yeah.
Same dress. It's not like, oh yeah, I've got that dress. You know, it's the same dress. It's the one dress. Now here, Teresa Quinn and Kathleen Quinn, sisters, and this is Willie Madden, Paddy Conway. These are my parents-in-law. I've got their son sitting next to me here, Mick. What can you notice possibly, you know, whose dress is it? Who owns the dress? Teresa or Kathleen?
The mother?
Mother, yeah, the older.
Sorry?
The woman in the right-hand photo, the older photo.
No.
Ah.
The previous generation.
No. You see, they're sisters. They are sisters. And
Oh, right, yeah.
Kathleen is the older sister. She actually gets married after Teresa.
Oh, right.
Why can you tell that Teresa actually owns the dress? How can you tell? What is it about her wedding, if you like?
It's the sleeves have been changed, haven't they?
They're much longer on Kathleen. They're much longer on Kathleen,
Yeah.
definitely. But this is a colour photo. They could afford a colour photographer at their wedding and just look at the bouquet. It's massive. And here we, you know, it's kind of slight, you know, they didn't have as much money, but I think it's an absolutely wonderful picture. And it's a wonderful message, because it shows that if we have something special that we wear and we share it with somebody we love, I mean, there's a really good story behind that. And, you know, everyone loves a wedding. I would like to say we all lived happily ever after, but hey, that's just, you know, what you can do if, you know, you kind of think a bit creatively. And I just think it's a wonderful picture with the 2 twin sisters on their wedding day wearing the one dress. The next photo, I hope, will bring smiles to your faces, because again, it's kind of looking at, you know, what we can do. Now, some amazing young women here. This is the last school I worked at, and where we used to live, Walthamstow. Daughter Teresa's on this, and I think her friend Sophie's here too. They went to Walthamstow School for Girls. It's an amazing school. And this group of girls were in year 11. So this is about 2014, so not long after the Rana Plaza disaster. And they formed a group to raise money for our local food bank. And it was usually through the usual cake sale. You know, everybody likes a cake sale. But they said, let's have a clothing sale. Let's try and sell clothes. And so what happened was that the teachers, mainly the teachers, and there were some very stylish teachers at that time, brought in a lot of their clothes. And this particular age group don't necessarily go to charity shops and buy clothes. And they were just so excited at the thought that they could buy these amazing clothes, and some of them designer labels. And so they set it all out themselves. And I think we made about £300 for the food bank selling these clothes. And, you know, we had girls bringing in lots of sort of jewelry, and it was just such a great event. So I'm kind of hoping that we need to kind of be looking at education, be looking at what we can do, but not telling people what to do, but giving them resources so that they can do something themselves. And I absolutely love that photo. It's kind of just really captures the fun that you can have when you actually give people responsibility for doing something, and they realize that how wonderful it is. So in a way, that's kind of my last slide, but my very last slide has got some, I don't know if I should leave it up. It's got some websites I want you to go to, and please do. So Labour Behind the Label, you can kind of like subscribe to them, and they will give you updates. And so we need to be informed about what's going on, and any kind of like actions, we can get involved with that. Fashion Revolution, with that kind of template email. So please, everybody, don't leave tonight without pledging to say you will send an email wherever you live. If it won't kind of send in the UK, I'm sure you can copy it. Please read the report, look at the MPs that are on it, contact them. And the Ethical Trading Initiative is a bit like Fair Trade, coffee and chocolate and stuff. They'll tell you which manufacturers are part of the Ethical Trade Initiative. So you would, if you were buying new things, although Liz is absolutely right, the best thing is not to buy new clothes. But if you were, check out Ethical Trade. Goes back to the question about, are we taking work away? If people are going to be working to make our clothes, we need to know they are being properly paid. And the kind of baseline for that is the living wage for the country that they're working. So I can through that, I think, because, you know, a lot of it's been said, but also we want time. I have been quite positive. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. I think I'm going to ask you to not share your screen for the questions, because Sophie is very efficiently sharing those links anyway.
Oh no, I can't type them now because can you share it again so I can carry on typing them?
Oh God, I've no idea if I can share it again. I'll try.
Oh, don't worry, I've got them in WhatsApp. I'll put them in a minute.
Let me try. I'll go share. But last time I tried this, I think
Are they in the WhatsApp group? Because I can get them off there.
No, they're in a conversation with me. I'll put them in a moment.
Shall I get rid of this then, Jane?
Yeah. So what we're going to do, I think, if we go to gallery view, then I can see just about everybody, but we will not spotlight me for this, I think. I prefer it just to be a little bit more open now than we've dared to be the questions and answers so far. So first of all, as you said, brilliantly, Jill, brilliant explanation of the problems that we're all facing and some of the things that we can do about it. But I would like you to carry on working hard and answer some of the questions that are going to come up. There's a question there already from Teresa, which you could answer, Jill, if you wouldn't mind. But for the other questions, I'm going to be bold. I'm going to just ask you, please, to put your name in the chat if you want to ask a question, and I'll just take you in order, and you can switch your microphone on, ask your question yourself, and it'll be a little bit more like a discussion and a conversation. So if you can put your name in the chat while you're thinking of your question, we'll just take that first one. Jill, can you tell us again who the artist at the start was, please?
They're called the Singh twins. So SINGH, Sing Twins. They're based in somewhere, I think it's Warrington or somewhere like that. And I don't know if anybody watched, gosh, I forgot what it was called, Grace and Perry Club. They were on that. And please look on their website. They've got amazing paintings. They did have an exhibition in Manchester a while ago, but that was too long ago. But their work is fantastic. So the Sing Twins.
Right. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Lots of thank yous. Theodora, would you like to ask your question? Do you want to switch your microphone on and either ask that question or comment on it? Or just say what you're thinking.
Sorry, it wasn't really a question.
Not everybody's got access to chat, so maybe you could read your own comment there.
That's a good point. It wasn't really a question. It was just sort of a comment about the question around if you had low paid, if you asked people to stop buying so many articles of clothing, would that put low paid garment workers out of work? And in my opinion, I think yes, in the short term, but what I would rather see is that people buy many fewer items of clothing that are much better quality. That would end up lasting a longer time, but that take a great deal more hours in terms of the making time of it. So I think that you could probably balance it out by, have people buying fewer garments that are made much better and last much longer. And so I do think you could probably work it out so that it balanced out eventually.
Right, do we have any questions? Would anybody like to ask a question?
Can I just say on that point as well? Sorry, it's Patty.
Yes,
I think globally we should be moving towards higher aspirations for people anyway. Less people working in those sorts of jobs generally. We should be having more education and just bringing more people into different types of work. I mean, that's kind of like a big long-term plan, but we should have aspirations for people in the world that they're doing not menial tasks basically. But anyway, that's just kind of a bigger thought.
Can I also say, I think it's what I said at the very start. We need to have different relationships with the people that make our clothes. And there are some of the ethical brands. There's one particular one called Lucy and Yak, and they just use one village in India. And they support that community. So there are, knowing it's kind of your clothes have come from, knowing who's made them. So it's kind of like supporting work where people are paid properly and working under good conditions and making good quality clothes, of course, like Patty said. So the work, making garments is a skill, it's art, and it shouldn't be into this kind of like drudgery and the cruelty that goes on with it. So I think there are ways that we do support people who are making garments without exploiting them so much anyway.
Any more questions, comments? You can indicate in chat or put your hand up if I could possibly see everybody. Indicate somehow if you'd like to ask something or say something. Lucy and Jack have actually made the most amazing scrubs during the pandemic.
Sophie, can you send us some pictures of those, please? I'd like, if you send some pictures, I'd like to see their scrubs, actually. Thank you.
There were lots of scrubs made locally with locally donated fabric as well, which was a major effort going on. Can anybody comment? Oh, Penny's coming in.
Just a quick question. Yeah, the comment you made early on in the presentation today was about the fact that you used to make your own clothes and then it became not cost effective. How do you think it's a good way to get more people making their own clothes, but also in a cost and time effective way? Do you think there's anything we can do that's going to be helpful to make that easier for people, or if there's more local people that could be helping with making clothes? I don't know, just something that would help us move in that direction again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult at the moment, as everything is with COVID. But the thread mill in Hayfield, and I think Ruby's Rags, Linda at Ruby's Rags does it. It's got to be like a communal activity. I think what they did at the thread mill in Hayfield is that you can take a project along, which could be quite difficult, or it could be really simple, and then you'll get shown how to do it, but you're doing it in a quite a social setting. So I think once we're able to do that kind of thing again, do more of that. And we mentioned, I can't remember, yesterday or the day before, we were talking about repair cafes, but we need to do that because Helen, I don't know, Helen's here somewhere, Helen Dean, and Jen Medway, we did something at the thread mill which was called Dress a Girl Around the World, which is a charity whereby we were just given clothes that were cut out. We were making little shorts and little dresses, and we were just sewing them together, and then they were going to be sent off to girls, and there were certain specifications so that they weren't see-through, they were, and that was a wonderful activity. So before lockdown, there were things going on, but I think I don't know if we can do them online, because you need sometimes to be shown how to do things like, my machine's come unthreaded, I don't know what to do. It's kind of like that sort of thing.
Just while that link was there, I thought I might show you this.
Oh, wow. These are look at these.
Quite expensive.
Yeah, but Jane, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Point, isn't it? Because clothes are too cheap. Is £26 expensive for a...
Well, we were giving them away, but yes.
No, I know what you mean. I do it. Community organisations were giving them away, but if you were selling them, I don't think that is expensive. That's another question, isn't it? It's kind of like we should pay more for our clothes. We've said this, but I don't think it's expensive.
I think Lucy and Yak use organic cotton as well. So that's going to put the price up a bit, but again, for very good reasons.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so buying scrubs will be around £48 to £50, fair enough, if they're going to be commercially made. Could I comment just a little bit on the point that Patty made? Because I think at the moment, sewing in the third world is a very menial job and very brutal if you're working in those factory conditions. But if conditions were improved and people were making quality garments with skill and not necessarily just making the one seam and then passing it down the line or whatever to somebody else to do another bit, we found during lockdown making things is a very satisfying job, and I think Theodora will attest to that this is not necessarily something that we should wish people to progress out of. It's a respectable profession if we treat them in a respectful way, probably.
But I don't know, I'm a big believer in education, and I mean, I don't know a lot about this, I'm just making it up, but I imagine there's a lot less higher education, there's a lot less high school in some of those countries. I imagine the age of some people that go work in those factories is quite young. So, I would prefer to see those people, probably mainly girls, going into further education than going into a sewing factory. And I'm making assumptions and generalizations, but I'm pretty sure there's some truth in it. And I don't know, I just think we need more education in the world, and then we can have more technology and more advancement and more development, good development. But that's just me making things up. So
it could be a choice of career rather than something that's forced on people.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with what Patty's just said, but I think Jill also referred to the fact that work like that should never be seen as menial. Same as, that it's necessary, it's vital, it's skillful. It's like so many jobs in our Western world are seen to be menial when they shouldn't be at all.
And yeah, that was a poor choice of word perhaps, but I mean, if you're there every day sewing the same seam, it's not like you're making a garment, you're sewing a seam, you're sewing shoulder seams all day. That's not making a garment.
Yeah, point taken.
Any more comments, questions?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on Helen's question. about the ethical fabric, I would just say it is extraordinarily difficult to buy ethically sourced fabric. I couldn't tell you any suppliers nearby. The best I could say is to buy woolens directly from mills in Huddersfield, or you could try to have you could go to Wise Heart and Wild and ask them to make you some fabric. There are ethical suppliers out there, but it's not, you can't just walk into your normal fabric store and find, the ethical range where you could buy all of the things that you need. Yes, in the chat box, the new mills will, absolutely. But we can't all buy that because Kate doesn't actually have time to weave us all the fabric that we need for our entire wardrobes at this time, because it is so labor intensive, it is so time consuming. So I would just say that my approach is I often go to charity shops and buy things that I will then remake into other things. I just use, if it's a big dress, then it's got lots of fabric in the skirt. I could make a skirt out of that or a top out of that. I know Sue Cooper's been reusing different things in her wardrobe to make things. So the issue is that if you buy a t-shirt from Primark for £2, you can't even buy the jersey material in a fabric store anywhere in the UK that would cost that amount. The fabric will cost more than £2 just to make that t-shirt. So it's just wildly imbalanced right now, and I don't really have a good solution for that, but I would say that I find it very difficult to find ethically sourced fabric to make things out of.
I think you can find vintage fabric, like old fabric or fabric from people's stashes who no longer sew. I go into the volunteer centre and say, do you have any white fabric? They go upstairs and they bring me down meters of it. The volunteer centre in Emils has got quite a lot of supplies that have been donated to them from various people. So I think there must be loads of fabric around. I mean, just like there's loads of clothes around, there must be loads of fabric around. So I'm like Abercarns, somewhere like that. I think that's kind of ethical, because it's all the offcuts and the ends of lines and things like that. So I don't know, there's ways and means.
Yeah, it definitely reduces waste, but I guess what I'm saying is that if you're trying to find new fabric that's been ethically produced, that is difficult. And yes, secondhand fabric is definitely the way to go in that case.
And I think we've mostly covered Liz Honeybell's point there, as fabric and fibre production have a huge carbon footprint. Would it be better for us to make new clothes from old as much as possible? I think we're saying yes, ideally. Now, Kate from Wise Heart, would you like to give us a bit more information on your comment?
Right, yeah. I mean, it is as Theodora says, I think it's education that's needed fundamentally, because all crafts tend to be deemed women's work, and therefore they are devalued. So sewing, knitting, weaving, spinning, all those things that still go on, and believe it or not, in this country, there's a huge uptake of all these skills, are devalued for that reason, and therefore all the things that surround it are devalued. There is a movement called the Northwest Fibre Shed, which has started in Manchester, which again is getting people to look at, in your locality, what can you make? And, things like linen can be grown, flax can be grown. We grow it for oil, all that sort of thing, but it is there. Also, believe it or not, a fibre called Rami, which is actually nettles. And, that fibre, I tell you something, the German army marched on nettle fibre. It's why they were so prickly, obviously. But, they it makes a really lovely fabric. And there's a group of people in Brighton who are developing the whole idea of using nettles and whatever. So it is sourcing these people out. It's sourcing out what's there and actually going, okay, I'm going to buy one item, not four, and I'm going to stick with that item. And if I can make, there's a lovely lady, one of my customers, who decided she wanted an outfit, so wove it. Yes, it took longer, and I was like, oh my goodness, she's never woven anything before in her life. But honestly, it is, the coat that she made is beautiful, and there won't be another one like it. That's the other thing. So there are ways around it, and I know they seem very small, but I think if everybody does a small thing, it becomes bigger. And basically that's what we're all about at Wise Heart and Wild. Natural fibre, and in the main thing, local fibre. Our wool is produced from sheep that grew their wool within 10 miles of the shop. Now I've had to invest in getting it spun so that people will use it. If I hand spun it all, apart from the fact I still be sitting there hand spinning it, some people wouldn't like to use it because it's not like, you know, it's not like a double knit or whatever. So we had it spun as a 4-ply and a weaving yarn. That's one thing we did. There's lots of things you can do, and again, sign those petitions. That was, you know, that's what it's all about. Moving people and motivating people, and it's got to work. We've got to put this right. Sorry, that's me. Rant over.
Can I suggest after this, I'm going to, as always, make a post thanking the speakers, but I will make another post with the main links that we've shared tonight, and there are dozens of them. So we'll keep those handy, and you can go to our New Mills Fashion Week page to find the links from the chat. And as well, I'm going to ask you under that, when I've made that second post, could you have a little conversation, put a few comments in there, whether you want to do something as a group, whether we want to meet again and have a kind of action result from this. You just see what sparks off each other. Alison.
So in there as well, maybe you could find the link on iPlayer to a programme on the radio a short while ago, an episode of Forethought, which was about craftivism, which Liz Honeybell told me about. And in Liz's thing, she had that little, one of the things was from a craftivist thing, and it was fascinating. And these craftivists did actually manage to convince, I can't remember which firm it was now, but a large firm, to pay their workers a proper wage by a whole campaign of them. It was using craftivism. I think they were making small crafted items for all the. They had a fascinating way of approaching things by actually researching all the board members and giving presents. They just did it in a really, I think they call it a gentle form of protest, but it actually worked. And they got the directors of a company to pay the living wage to all of their workers, and it was through crafting. So it's all about craftivism, and it's a whole programme on Radio 4 on the programme that's called Forethought some Wednesdays ago. And it'd be worth a listen. And we might get some, you know, we might be able to think of our own craftivism project. So rather than just the email, like saying, oh, you know, write an email, this was where they actually, you know, hand sewed messages to people and delivered them at board meetings and gave them handkerchief, you know, they just did all these things that actually worked, because it wasn't it was about, instead of protest being very sort of aggressive and then you immediately put someone's hackles up because you're telling them, look, we don't like you, you're really bad, you're evil, you're wicked, change your ways. They had a different way of approaching it that actually got the people to listen to them and change their mind through crafting. So I think it's worth a thought.
That sounds brilliant. So it's either 1 or 2 posts that are going to come on after our thank you post. So I think it's time to wind up, but thank you very much for coming and being an attentive audience. And we've got one more event this week, which may not have over 40 members coming like we had today. It was a phenomenal turn up, but tomorrow is going to be pure fun, looking at everybody's remade garments, much loved, long lived in garments, cheap charity shop bought garments, and we have lots and lots of pictures and a few videos to show you tomorrow, and that will be a nice way to end the week in a relaxed way. So a handkerchief project, Jill says. Right, well, we'll put all of our ideas into notes and see what comes out of it for after tomorrow. So TED Talk activism needs introverts. Okay, so I think one of us will go through these chat notes and pick out all the things that are of interest and pop them into a post.